Welcome. I also want to thank Anne Roberti of Framingham State College and Nancy Stute, a librarian at Framingham. In June, I contacted Framingham Library and said, Hani and I were supposed to do a book tour. We were supposed to go to libraries and schools and bookstores, and we can't. What can we do on Zoom? So here we are. And today we're going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'd really like to have a conversation with all of you. So if you have, oh, someone's having cinnamon bread. Yay. Yay, Gail. If you want to put questions or comments up as we go along, I see Dan Leonard. Hi, Dan. Please put them in the chat room and we'll try to get to everybody. We want to be very informal today. So we've all come from somewhere else and we've come to this country. And this is Hani's story of coming to this country. I met Hani 3 years ago at a storytelling event in Newton. And she told a story about her doll, Lily. And Hani, maybe you could introduce us to Lily?
This is Lily, and she's about, 83 years old.
Doesn't she look good, everybody, for 83?
She had a facelift. So she's really the only toy that I was able to bring with me from Vienna. And we did go for a little facelift, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Yes, she has new hair.
So when I heard Hani speak, she talked about her childhood in Vienna, and she talked a lot about the five senses. And I want to urge you to get in touch with that today, your childhood memories. What did you taste? What did you smell? What did you touch? What did you see? Because the sensory memories are very rich for us. And the end of her talk, she said, and now 80 years later, I still have Lily. And when she said that, it just touched something in my heart. I was thinking, what do any of us have from our childhood that still represents so much to us? So I approached Hani and I said, we have to write your story. And she said, oh, okay. I said, but I know that you have 4 adult children and many almost adult grandchildren, and I don't want to take that story from them. And do you remember what you said, Hani?
No, what did I say?
You said, I'm 87 years old and they haven't asked me to write the story yet.
Oh, okay.
So we felt we could go ahead and tell the story. So, Hani, I would like you to give us a small version of your story, and we call our book Inspiration, Immigration and Inspiration. And the goal of writing our book, which is right here, My Two Cities, it has original family pictures. It's for children, for teens, and adults. And the goal is really to get people in touch with their own family history or histories and to inspire people who are coming here today as immigrants. And hopefully we will achieve that goal with you here this morning. So, Hani, why don't you tell us a little about your story?
Okay. Well, in the book, first of all, Robin and I worked very hard on making rhymes because it's really for children. Although since then we found that their parents also like it very much.
And grandparents.
And grandparents. So the story starts with my life in Vienna, which was a happy one, living in an apartment house overlooking a park where we always played. And so the first part of the book is all happy, you know. It tells a little bit about our cook, Frau Lisi, whom we loved a lot. And I remember her smelling of yeast and having a very soft tummy. And so then the middle part, we tried not to make it scary because it was intended for children. And so we told about how it was the day, it was in March 1938, March 13th, I think. And my sister, Susie, who is 3 years older than I, were in a dance recital. And we took the streetcar with my mother to the hall. And when we went into the hall, there were hardly anyone there, just a few parents. And on the way home, the men in the streetcar had turned, the lapels of their coats over to show the swastika. And it was the first time we had seen the swastika. And well, we were little, so we didn't know what that meant. But I know that my father was a doctor. He was a social democrat. He was on the liberal side. I know that they secretly listened to news, which must have been given in German since they didn't speak English, but it came from the BBC. They were not really allowed to listen, but they knew what was happening. So that was the day. That evening, Chancellor Schuschnigg gave his speech saying that he wanted to prevent bloodshed at the border, and his allowing the German army to come in without any resistance. So the way that it affected us was quite sudden.
Hani, maybe we can read a little from the book at this point.
Oh, okay, I've got it.
Let's see. Page 7.
Okay, so here's how it is in the book. Men on the streetcar had their collars turned out to show everyone there can be no doubt. We wear our swastika pins with pride to tell the Nazis we're on their side. We turned on the radio before we went to bed, and this is what the Austrian president said. To avoid bloodshed and to prevent a fight, I will let German soldiers take over tonight. Laws against the Jewish people passed the very next day. Susie and I couldn't go to school or to the park to play. Papa was not allowed to treat his patients anymore, and Mutti, that's my mother, could not shop for food at the grocery store. One by one, non-Jewish friends began to turn away. Papa sighed and said, I'm afraid we cannot stay. So that's for the children. We didn't want to say anything too scary. So I don't know, am I supposed to tell more about what happened? Or what?
I think you're supposed to show your suitcase.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I would Lily time.
So at this point, when we're talking to groups, we ask people, if you had to leave, and unfortunately, this is sort of relevant today with COVID and all the things, what would you take if you could pack one suitcase? And this is your actual suitcase, right, Hani?
Yes, and it has, so my father put green stripes on so that we could recognize all the suitcases because we had to leave. Well, okay, I'm skipping over what happened in Vienna or what. Robin.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about first of all, not everyone, of course, could leave Europe just because they wanted to. It was a very difficult process. Yes. And when we talk to groups, we make this point that people leave for various reasons, for economic reasons, for political reasons, for religious persecution reasons. And you don't just say, I'm leaving and get on the ship. What did your family have to do, Hani?
Oh, okay. So my father, who was very foresighted, went to the American consulate right away and began the process. And it was very difficult. There were so many, you had to have a lot of documents. For one thing, you had to have an affidavit from someone in the country where you were going who would vouch for you, that you wouldn't be that they would basically take care of you. You needed a quota number. You needed something called Volljude, which means that you're a Jew. I don't know. You needed to have your taxes paid. You had to have escape tax, which was a third of all your assets. You had to have an entry visa, ship ticket, criminal check, military record, and so on and so forth. So here's what happened very luckily, because we were extremely lucky. My father was born in Trieste, which now is Italy, but before World War I was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So he was Austrian, but when we went to the consulate, they asked him where he was born, and they put us down as Italians. So we were on the Italian quota, which was not filled, which enabled us to come to this country, because if we had been on the Austrian-German quota, I doubt that we would have gotten out. So,
And who came, honey? Who comprised your family?
well, my parents and my grandmother, my mother's mother, whom we called Moni, came with us, and my sister Susie, the five of us. So Moni, my grandmother, had lived around the corner from us in Vienna, but then the Nazis started doing house searches, and she got very nervous because they did come into her house, and so she didn't want to stay there anymore. She moved in with us, and she stayed with us until well, she lived to be 103, so she lived with us till the
And
end.
she voted in every American election till she was 100. That's a timely statement, right? When you became citizens later on.
Yes, yes, yes. She learned English. She went to night school. She learned about the Constitution.
Let's backtrack a little and talk about Frau Lisi, your cook, and almost your nanny in a way, and what she did to help save your family that night that you were away from your Vienna apartment.
Oh, yes. Well, one day we were at my uncle's house in another part of Vienna, and Frau Lisi, our cook, called and said, "Don't come home right now because the SS is downstairs and they're plundering the." There was a preschool, a Jewish preschool on the ground floor. And they're plundering that, throwing all the furniture, everything out on the street, and so don't come home yet. So we waited, and then my father went first to check it out until we came. And sure enough, the SS had put the headquarters downstairs on the ground floor in our apartment house. So we were on what we would call the third floor. Right? And we had the balcony. We were in a corner apartment, balcony went around the corner. We always played on the balcony. But oh, that's the story about Lily. So Lily was wrapped very tightly in all kinds of blankets, luckily, because I was playing on the balcony, and for some reason, I don't know how, she fell into the garden where the SS had their long tables, and they were sitting there drinking. They were drinking beer and singing. And my mother said, "If you're very polite, you can go down and ask for the doll." And so I
And
went.
how old were you, honey, when this happened?
I was 8. So I went. I curtsied very politely, and I did get the doll back. But subsequently, there was a knock on our door, and a big SS man came in, in his black outfit, and he put his hat down on the table. And I was very scared because it showed the skull and the crossbones. And the reason he had come in was to hang a big banner from our balcony down to the ground floor. And it had the SS, the lightning bolt symbol on it. So after that, we didn't play anymore on the balcony. But our cook, Frau Lisi, yeah, she was very important.
Very So I'm gonna short circuit it a little.
Mhm.
They the Ehrenthal, that was your maiden name, right? Ehrenthal family was
Right.
able to leave. And as you'll see in the book, which I realize I have to donate some copies to the Framingham Library so you can see it. They went first to Italy by train. This was a journey, a taxi to the train station in Vienna at night. No one could know when you were leaving, which made it hard to say goodbye to people. Then to Naples, Italy,
Yeah,
where
well, actually, it was a Sorrento.
Sorrento, where you witnessed Mount Vesuvius erupting. And then from Sorrento to where, honey?
Well, then we went through France and we got the ship, the SS Washington in Le Havre. And I remember when my father said when we're in Ireland, they hoisted the American flag and everybody was very moved and we felt that we were free. And we arrived in New York after a very stormy passage uh, on actually on November 10th, which was Kristallnacht,
1938.
1938. And the reason it had been so stormy, well, from New York, took the train to Boston, and we saw all these houses collapsed and trees down. And my sister Susie was the only one that spoke a little English. My father said, "Go to the conductor and ask what happened." And she came back and she said, "Hurricane." We didn't know what a hurricane was, but that was the famous hurricane of 1938 that came all the way up in New England. We said, what kind of a country are we coming to?
Everything's flattened, right? Everything's flattened. Um, and the reason you came to Boston was because your father, the doctor, had a colleague in Boston who vouched for the family, and that's how you came here. And I was just thinking about Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, who told children always look for the helpers. And I think in this time of COVID and everything we're going through, we're seeing and we're looking for the helpers. And Hani, in your family's journey, you had helpers along the way, and you had helpers in this country. Starting with, tell us about the policeman when you walked to school.
Yes. Well, so first we lived in Brighton on Washington Street, and I went to public school. And of course, the teachers there had no concept at all of a child that didn't speak the language. So they just spoke louder. But I had 2 years of school in Vienna. Then they put me into the fourth grade, so I never was in the third. But on the way to school, there was a policeman that helped the children cross the street. And this was totally unheard of. I mean, we were so amazed that a policeman would be kind to the children and help them. And I think one thing that's not in the book, because it's not really for children, but there were a lot of agencies here that did help immigrants, helped us as refugees.
And tell about your sixth grade teacher.
Oh, Mrs. Sullivan.
Yeah.
Uh, well, she was a very strict teacher, but I think she did change the course of my life because she told my parents that I should go to girls' Latin school, and which I did, and my sister did too. And that was a college prep school. And yeah, I've always thought of Mrs. Sullivan.
I'm sure a lot of people listening have teachers who've changed their lives in some way too. Hani, one of the big themes of our story is how do you keep your heritage and your tradition from whatever background you are, and also become American or learn new traditions or fit in. Could you speak a little about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because I think one of the reasons that that I was enthusiastic about writing this children's book is because there are so many immigrants here now. And my parents felt very strongly that we want to get adjusted to the new culture, to accept what was good in America, but still to retain the culture of where we came from. So we did speak German at home. And of course, Vienna, had a very rich culture. And so I think that, so when Robin and I were speaking at some of the high schools to kids, that came across rather strongly, because I think many groups now tend to it's more comfortable, to just stay in your own little circle. But my parents had American friends and Austrian friends, and I think that was an important part of the book. And one thing, Robin, that we forgot to say was that when I left Vienna in the taxi,
Yes.
that cold and rainy night, I said, and I was 8 years old, and I said, when I'm twice as old as I am today, I'm going to love my new city as much as I love Vienna. And so
Yes.
then,
And that's how we got the name for the book, My Two Cities.
and so then when I was 16, that actually happened. Yes.
I want to pick up on teaching to the high schools. Before the schools closed down, we spoke at Newton North High School to students who had come here from other countries. There were students from Guatemala, China, Brazil, Russia, such a diverse group. And it was amazing to see, especially some of the big young men hugging Hani, because they knew what it was like to come here and not speak English. They knew what it was like to leave friends and family and toys and things. They knew what it was like to struggle and want to be the first in their family to go to college. So these are generational stories. They don't end. They just continue. It was quite touching to see that.
Yeah, and I think it was very good because Robin is very good at engaging the students, and she asked, what is it that you had to leave behind? What's their favorite toy or book or piece of jewelry or something that you had to leave? And what were you able to take? So they were quite, we've spoken not just at Newton North, at some other places.
Hani has translated the book into Italian and German, so we're going to see how that goes. But I wanted to speak a little bit about your parents and how they adjusted. And also with Thanksgiving, not that far away, I want you to encourage everyone here. It would be I don't know what Thanksgiving is going to look like for many of us in person or on Zoom, but to talk about families and where we came from and what we can contribute and give back now to other families who are coming here. You told us a little, Hani, about football. Did you have some experience with football? And
Football.
football, you said when you watched it with your
Oh,
family.
oh my God. I think it was the first week we were here, and we were walking, and it was in Cleveland Circle, and we saw all these people, young men, falling over each other and fighting. And we said, well, what kind of a country is this? It was American football. And I don't know how many of you speak German or even Yiddish. My grandmother went to the corner store with her dictionary, and she wanted to make an almond cake. And she looked up the word, and the first translation was tonsils. And she asked for a pound of tonsils. uh, but luckily, there were two ladies in the store who spoke Yiddish, and they rescued her.
What message do you have for young people today, Hani? And not so young people who are coming here?
Get involved, vote.
You became citizens.
Vote. Yeah.
Have you gone back to Vienna? I mean, I know the answer to this, but
The answer. Well, the first time I went back actually was right after I graduated from college. I spent a year in Italy, in Florence. And during that year, I went to Vienna, and it was very, very depressing. It was not only that the weather was cold, but everything was bombed out. And Vienna was still divided into 4 zones. And Frau Lisi was living in the Russian sector, which we were not really supposed to go to with an American passport, but I went anyway. So that was a very difficult trip. I suffered from a stomachache the whole time. But I've been back since then various times, and each time it gets a little easier. And the last time I was there was actually just before COVID.
Yeah, it was March. It was in March.
I went with the Boston College Chorale, and it was so great, and did go to Vienna, and I went to the apartment house. Unfortunately, I couldn't get into the apartment. No one was there. I mean, I rang the bell, but I was in the apartment. Everything looked much smaller. Yes.
Always does. Could you say a little about the Statue of Liberty and what that meant to you and all the people on that ship coming over?
Well, after a week or more on the ocean, we did see the Statue of Liberty, and everybody ran to that side of the ship, and there was many tears and hugging.
And you married an American man, actually someone who served in World War II, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stanley was in World War II. And now Hani has a very typical American family. So many different religions and ethnicities and backgrounds, a very multicultural family of children and grandchildren, which is a nice way for the world to be. All right, so we would love to take some questions. Gail asked a question. Where did Hani grow up in Massachusetts, and what town does she live in now?
Oh, well, we went right to Boston. First we lived in Brighton, and now I live in Newton, in Chestnut Hill. Yeah.
And you raised your family in Newton?
Yes, but now they're all scattered. Yeah.
They're all scattered all over. Questions, comments? I'd love to hear about some of your family stories, and what you share. One thing that I feel is that I ask my parents and grandparents so many questions, but it's never enough. You know, when they're gone, the stories and the history is gone. So I really encourage you and your children and grandchildren to get those stories now.
Beth, you have some stories, no?
Yes, I see Julie wants to share something. Julie, where are you? You can unmute, please.
I'll speak after Julie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, Beth. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my camera's not working, so
Okay.
I'm stuck with the big J.
Okay.
So, Hani, my father was a little bit older than you. He would have been 95 now, but he also left in 1938. But I guess because he was older, his experiences were different, and his family circumstances were different. So, among the things that he remembers is after in school, after the Jews were separated out from the other classes, and they had to be in their own classroom. And I guess they didn't get outside for recess. And he remembers one time when they were trying to play ball, catch in the classroom. And by accident, the ball hit the glass on a portrait of Hitler and smashed it. And they were really scared. And then there was, I have one object. It's not a doll by any means. It's a very tiny porcelain penguin. And my father held on to it, and I have it now. And he gave it to my grandmother and her sister, kind of like as a good luck token, because they were called into the Gestapo. And he was left alone, and it was like a token for them to come back. And I mean, they did, but he said they were white as sheets. And then when so my grandfather had actually gone to a job in Shanghai, and my grandmother and her sister were living, in Vienna in the apartment with my father. And, they tried to apply for, a visa to leave. And I guess they were stuck in the line, and, it wasn't getting anywhere. And fortunately for them, we had a relative who had married a French diplomat. And through his kind of offices, I don't remember exactly what it was, but the next time they went, they got right to the front of the line. And that helped them leave. And they came on the St. Mary. And when they arrived at Ellis Island, my father also recalls being terrified. He was 13, but he was separated from his parents, like overnight. So, that was very, very scary for him. And
Thank you. Julie,
that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to be able to
Absolutely.
get to everybody.
Go for it, Robin.
Thank you for sharing that. What's very funny? Hani's daughter's name is Julie Sweet, right, Hani?
Yes.
And this is a different Julie Sweet. Beth.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I have two families. One, my mother was born in the Ukraine, and my father's family's from Aleppo, Syria, and they're Jewish on both sides. And both families had to leave their countries because of the restrictions on Jews, and especially my mother's family were really escaping from the pogroms. And they had a similar kind of trip to France. They had to go from the Ukraine. I think they went by foot mostly. There's stories of crossing rivers, hiring guards to hold the baby. My aunt Esther, and my mother was 3, and Esther was 1. And they stuffed their mouths with rags to prevent them from crying, to be heard. And of course, the baby cried, and the guy almost drowned her. So there was lots of traumas when they got to Ellis Island. So they had to cross, I don't know how long it took. Apparently there were some stays in jail as well. But when they got to Ellis Island, my mother, who was 3, had pink eye. And so they quarantined her. So they separated her from her family for, I don't actually know how long. It was quite a number of days. And
so childhood separation is not necessarily a new thing.
Exactly. When that happened at the border, I thought a lot about that, of course. And anyway, I want to just say that, Hani, it was very moving to hear your story, and it actually, I felt so sad and scared, and also worried about all of us now because of the rise of Nazism all over the world, actually. So anyway.
Well, we're hoping that by this book, we can reach out to people of all religions, of all backgrounds, and show, what we have in common, what we share. Dan, what do you have to say about all this?
Well, I applaud your bringing this out again. I read the book. I think it's charming. My compliments, Hani.
Robin wrote it.
Well, we wrote it together. I'd love to hear from some more people about your own stories and background, if anyone wants to share.
Well, Robin, I've written a great deal about my family for your writing course.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
I do have, my mother's mother was German, but they came over in 1870, so that doesn't count.
Well, it counts.
Yeah. I mean, it was when Kaiser Wilhelm was, the King of Prussia, was drafting everyone. And there was a great exodus from Germany at that time to avoid having to be in the army.
15.
So that was a different,
Yeah, that's right.
a different motivation.
Yeah. Who else can share something of their family? Wants to? Someone asked a question, have we been involved with Facing History? And we have contacted them, and we hope to be doing something with them very soon. Because it's not just about telling history, it's about what do we do today? How can we be affirmatively involved in gaining acceptance and blending communities, not just enough to tell a story, but to be out there on the front lines with people who need our support today.
But the family story I could share briefly, if you want,
Yes.
is my father actually left Ireland in a very troubled time in 1915. And I was raised out in the Mojave Desert because somehow he got from Ireland to land in a mining camp in Tonopah, Nevada.
Oh my God.
And we don't know the details of that. My wife did do on a website for Ellis Island. We tracked the ship down, and because he grew up around Dublin, he shipped out of Liverpool. And so that's a good resource to do the Ellis Island. If you know approximate dates, they could give you the ship number and everything. And we had to get his passport and all these other informations to get Irish citizenship. But how he got to this mining camp, we have no idea. We heard he had an uncle or something in Salt Lake City who might have told him there's jobs in Tonopah. So he worked in a silver mine and he was good with numbers because he went to a very good prep school for a couple of years in Dublin. And so he got promoted to be the office person. And then he worked for a rather famous person who's nicknamed Boris Smith.
Yeah.
And he said, well, why don't you go set up the office at this borax plant? I'm starting out in the California desert. So the 20 Mule Team guy. So he went there about 1923 or so. In the meantime, he went into the Army in World War I to get his citizenship. He never got shipped overseas, but he was in the Army Air Corps. So there's some family history we've tried to track back. My older brother, who's Honey's age, had some knowledge, but he just died and I didn't get all he knew. The oral history was a little weak because my father said, I'll go back to Ireland when it quits raining. There is some family history we can get on the Irish side because a couple of the relatives had written books. So
Fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I wanted to mention a very important thing also, that Hani's father helped to bring out 17 families from Vienna after they came to the US. And
that's great.
by getting sponsors for them. So this is not just a story of a family escaping, it's how do we help other people? And now, with the election and COVID and so much going on in this country, I think more than ever, if we could present a united front as human beings, as Americans, as sympathetic, empathetic people, that would be great. Yes, Brigitte.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Brigitte, and I have a little bit of a different story. I came here as an adult, as an immigrant. I grew up in Germany, and you guys said you should always ask your grandparents and everybody the stories, to tell the stories. My grandfather was a Nazi, and the whole family was, there was the other side. So when I asked questions or stories, asked for stories, I always got the same stories. I never got the stories, the real stuff. So it's a different from a different side. Even if you ask, you don't always get the real stories. They always choose and pick what they want to tell because of shame, because of guilt, because of stubbornness, or we were right. So I got this this story from the other side, and I think it's a tricky thing when you come in a different country to get this fine line between trying to assimilate, trying to fit in, because that's what everybody expects, to learn the language, learn the traditions. On the other side, you don't want to lose your traditions and your things. So I think it's a fine line. It's not always easy to get accepted and stay true to your own country where you're from. And for me, it's a different thing because I came here as an adult, so it's a little bit of a different story.
When did you come here?
10 years ago.
Yeah.
You-
But That's what I'm saying. It's to adjust to the new and
Yes.
to still maintain the culture of the old.
Yes.
It's tricky.
Thank you for that. You raised such important questions, and maybe if you can put your information privately in the chat, we'd love to talk, because there are so many people trying to bridge that gap. You know, people who came from the same place with very different experiences, and yeah, people on all sides don't want to talk about it. People who had, so maybe the question is not to keep asking, but to say that you're interested if people want to tell their story, want to share their story, you know, maybe there are ways of doing it. I mean, Hani and I sat and sometimes we just talked about, tell us about that silver ball of gum wrappers, Hani. You know, sometimes objects take on real significance when you can't talk about the facts. Tell us.
Well, when I was in Vienna, you know, as a child, I made a ball of the silver wrappings around the candy. You know, now you get the tin foil, so it's not a big deal, but it was, I had a big ball. But that, my mother said we couldn't take that, you know, we had to leave that behind. I also had a collection of transfer tickets that you got, you know, when you transferred from the bus to the streetcar or something, and I had to leave that all behind. So I think one of the hard things as a child that I remember is that the kids that you used to play with just kind of turned their backs or had to cross the street and didn't talk to you anymore. So
Wow.
that was hard.
Yeah, as a child, can you imagine that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Honey, I wanted to say that when I was a boy, I also had a ball of tinfoil. That was in Chicago.
really,
So apparently it crosses all cultures.
this tradition is new to me, guys.
Well, I think it was not so much gum wrappers, but cigarette wrappers from my father's cigarettes. You had to
Okay.
separate it from the paper, and then you put it on the ball, and it was the size of a baseball. I don't know whatever happened to that. Some Philistine threw it out, I'm sure.
Also, you know, we haven't said that Hani and her family were the fortunate ones, but Hani, do you just want to mention a little bit about the rest of your family?
Yeah, well, my grandmother's family, they're all from Czechoslovakia. And my father, when Hitler came in, my father said, you need to leave. And they said, oh, no, you know, Hitler will never come here. And so, of course, all those people died in Auschwitz, except for one cousin, Hedi, who survived Auschwitz, as well as the death march toward the west, and actually settled in Australia. And she had never told, and she married another survivor, and they never told their daughter anything about the background, nothing. She was baptized and brought up as a Christian, and her name is Eva. When Eva reached the age of 40, she finally, you know, she kept asking her mother about family, but when she was 40, my cousin Hedi finally wrote her a long letter, which then developed into a whole journal about Hedi's background. And then that's another whole story that's quite amazing.
So many stories. So I think it would be appropriate to start to wrap up with the story of what your grandmother said when she went to vote, because a big message is vote, take an interest in your government. The government really affects our lives. So your family became citizens, and your grandmother voted in every election until she was 100.
Yes.
And what did she say? What happened when she came home from voting one day, Hani?
Well, my father asked her whom she voted for. And she said, the American Constitution says that that's a private matter. And she was 100. It says here in the book, can I just read?
Yeah.
When we hiked In the Blue Hills of Boston one day, I thought of the Vienna woods where Susie and I used to play. 5 years later, became proud citizens of the USA until her 100th birthday, Moni voted each election day. When I turned 16, the promise I had made came true. I loved Vienna and Boston, my two cities, old and new. We had made a new home in Boston with our whole family. It was Mutti, Papa, Susie, Moni, my doll Lily, and me. That's the end of the book. So I think the book is not something depressing, you know. It's really rather hopeful. I hope that, you know, I've given the Italian version to some of my Italian friends who are native Italians, because it's very, very hard for me to rhyme that. So they're going to work on it. The German,
I think you said, Hani, it was harder to rhyme the German.
German, I succeeded after a while, and I've checked with two of the German professors, and they're debating about commas and semicolons. But I'm not going to worry about it.
Maybe you should write an opera.
Yes,
That's a good one. That's a good one. The other thing I want to say beyond Hani's story of coming to this country, Hani is a fabulous example of living well and aging well. She hikes, she does yoga. She taught German at Boston College until last year. She hosts international students from everywhere in the world. She plays the piano. I just think that she's been a wonderful friend and role model and inspiration to me. I'll also put in the plug here that if any of you have schools or church groups or temples or associations where you think we might be able to share something and speak with people, we would be delighted, I guess on Zoom for now. And you could share that with Helen Lou or whatever. Gail did have a question about your father, Hani.
yes.
How did he start practicing medicine here?
Oh, well, first he had to learn English, and he worked very hard at that. He had a tutor, and then he took his medical boards and passed them, and began to have a private practice, but they were mostly refugees whom he treated, and he didn't charge them anything or very little. So eventually he worked at the VA hospital, gave up his practice. But yeah, we always laughed at him. He had a very strong accent.
And let's not forget your mother. What was her role here?
Well, for one thing, you know, we didn't realize it because we were kids and we were busy at school. But during those early years before the outbreak of the war, just after we came, my father got all these letters that said, "Lieber Otto, dear Otto," Otto was his first name, "help us to escape," you know. And so my mother, as well as my father, I think mostly my mother, went all the time to the consulate in Boston and the immigration. And my parents were able to find sponsors here because they didn't have the money to actually send the affidavits. But the American friends stuck their necks out, you know. And I think of this, there were more, well, my father was able to bring 17 families over, but many didn't make it. You know, there were many more than 17 that tried. My sister, Susie, collected all the documents which my father had filed and made a book. It's called Dear Otto, and it was published by the University of Vermont Holocaust Center. And it's pretty interesting. You know, she took several families and recorded all how complicated it was to get here.
And Susie became a psychiatrist, right?
No, Susie was an anesthesiologist.
Okay, so I don't know that anesthesiologist. I'd like to end on a really upbeat note, because our country is going through so much now and has been going through so much, and yet we are still the shining light. We are still the beacon. We like to think, we hope to think, people from all over the world still aspire to come here. And Hani, even before World War II, maybe we could wrap up with that little poem that your father used to sing with you and Susie.
But I only know it in German.
Well, that's okay. You can translate it then after.
Oh, we'd sit on rocking chair, you know, he would rock us. Yes. Männer ahoi, kommt alle herbei, rettet das Schiff, ein Riff, ein Riff. That would go on, and then vorbei ist das Riff, gerettet das Schiff, und siehe da, ein Land, Amerika. Well, you understand that, Brigitte?
Can you translate for us, Bridget?
Yeah, okay, so it's rocking and in the ocean, and there's a big boulder, you know, threatening the ship, and then they pass the boulder and look in the distance there, the land, America.
America. So even then we were a shining light.
Yeah.
And I hope we will be again. I hope we will be again. Well, thank you all so very much.